Welcome to STEAM Powered, where I have conversations with women in STEAM to learn a little bit about what they do and who they are. I'm your host, Michelle Ong. My guest today is Anna Ritzema. Anna is a STEM educator and a primary programs and STEM innovations manager in rural and regional Western Australia. Join us as we speak about Anna's journey, inquiry-based learning, and how we can guide students through their curiosity and help them to succeed. Good morning, Anna. Thank you so much for joining me today on STEAM Powered. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you again, talking more about your wonderful experiences through education.
Good morning. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Ah, it's wonderful. Okay, so get straight into it. You basically got into education as your
Mm.
field of preference, but what attracted you to education to start with?
Oh, I don't, I think when I was very young, I'm from a kind of my family are all in the medical field, and I kind of thought that was the transition I was going to go into. I wanted to be a doctor, and I think my father's actually in ophthalmology, and I remember going for a day in the hospital and seeing lots of eyes over a period of a day, and remember thinking, "Oh, I don't think I'm cut out to be this." Probably wasn't my introduction to medicine; it was the only one I had. So I went to that, and I remember
Yep.
thinking, I think it was probably the nurturing, the need, helping. And I remember always being at birthday parties and always working with the little children. I'd be the one at the little children's table, looking after them, colouring in. And so I think that was probably where it came from. It really was a kind of a vocation in the sense that I loved being around younger people and helping and supporting them. So I think that's probably where I ended up going into teaching, um, and just really that kind of element of being around people who make you smile and laugh all day. And I find that that is something that children do all the time. And I always feel that lovely buzz when
Yes.
you come away and you've had a really good time with someone. That relationships are super important. So that's probably a real driver for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you develop so many relationships as a teacher in so
Mm.
many ways, and the way that you engage with people really, it has an impact. And sometimes a lot of people forget about how much of an impact that can have on, during your formative years.
100%. I think, it is very common. I think you watch kind of celebrities on TV. I think the recent one was, Adele and her singing, and they asked about her favorite teacher, and the teacher was there. And I think it's a very emotive thing because you have such a connection with someone who is your ally in an environment where you might have a really strong relationship with your parents, or you might have, it's for a lot of children, that relationship thing is key in a school. So I think we all
Mm.
remember those teachers who changed the course of the or the direction in which we thought we were going. And interestingly, my favorite teacher was my English teacher. And I haven't gone into English, but the I remember just that feeling that when you were with him, that he just mesmerized or changed that whole lesson for you, and I think as well what was really important to me, and I
Yeah.
always bear this in mind when I'm teaching myself, is that he used to come so prepared to a lesson. He'd have mounds of paperwork, and he'd talk passionately. And I think children are one of those, they can filter out things so quickly. And if they know you're not invested, that relationship is gone. So really key to kind of connect to a child and show them your dedication, because that changes everything. What you're passionate about is so related to that person who's delivered it to you in the first place. So yeah, that's for me the kind of the aim of teaching anyway.
Absolutely. And, it's so true because, even once you get to university and your lecturers, if a teacher doesn't feel like they're engaging or that they care about the subject that they're teaching, you also want to clock out because, like, well, if they don't care about it, then why should I? And, it's such an important thing to be able to convey that you are interested and you do care about this subject.
And I think more and more so in my field with education and in that sort of STEM space, it's about that confidence and that belief that someone has given to you. The amount of times you will see children coming up through, and maybe they're not maybe performing at the right level in an exam or a test. We know this kind of the education system in that sense, but you see something in them with that passion, the drive for a science, especially in my field in science, and go, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to believe in you that you've got that potential to change it." And I think that is hugely important, because someone believing in you is massive, because you are more likely to overcome those challenges along the way, especially if you've got
Yes,
that person beside you. So that is really important.
it really is. Yeah, and yeah, just having that support. And you always remember the teachers who supported you the most. And even if it was just, with a kind word or a nudge in the right direction. And that's all you really need as a start to be able to
Yes.
build that rapport and that level of trust to be able to help get them through that part of education.
Very much so. And it's interesting. I think probably, I've been teaching now 20 years. And I think, the first part of my teaching when you're in the classroom. And then I moved into a bit of professional learning, teaching other teachers, and especially in that science space. And, you know, science and STEM are really difficult a lot of the time, and especially for teachers, because the worry that you're going to get it wrong, that, oh, I don't want to teach something if it's going
Yeah.
to be wrong. And I think that's really important, that it's actually the passion and the drive that you have. And I always used to say to teachers, when a child's up on stage getting their Nobel award for physics or for chemistry or whatever it is in that STEM field, it'll not be for the moment that you mixed up a context of mass and weight in your year 6 or year 7 lesson. They won't be remembering that. They'll be remembering when you stood on top of the desk and jumped off and was illustrating gravity, and you took them out to the playground and you ran down to feel air resistance. Those are the moments that the child will remember, and that person will remember, not maybe those little things that you might actually get wrong, but really, in the grand scheme of things, is really minimal. So that's what I always say. It's better to have had to go and tried it than to not.
Mm.
I think that's really important. And I think I always talk about my experience of education was my first real memory of education was, I think I was 3 or 4 years old, and they walked us to the local library for Halloween, and we sat down, and they were all tiny. I remember being tiny, and the librarian came in dressed as a witch. And I remember that absolutely being terrified, because I thought she was a real witch at that moment. And I knew who she was, but I was terrified. And I remember being so believed in that moment. And so what I say to teachers now is, like, create that moment and that experience, because, school is a long
Mm.
process, and we can just repeat, or we can provide moments where you go, oh, I remember that lesson because you did that. And even if it's something simple like changing where you stand in the room, if you're going to be teaching from the back of the room, or you've changed something, the great thing about that is that if you've provided that moment, your conversation, whatever you're doing in that time, in that lesson, will carry on outside of your classroom. I don't,
Mm.
when I'm in a science room, a lab, I want that science to carry on talking beyond my lab door. I want children to leave with more questions than what they came in with. That is the key thing. If
Yes.
I've answered everything, if I've done everything well, that's not the key thing. I want to say, kids go, oh, I want to know more about this, or I'm going to ask my dad about this. I'm going to go back. And that kitchen table conversation, that dinner table conversation is so important, just so
Mm.
vital. And I think if we look at what's happened in the world in the last few years, even more so, that kind of scientific
Yeah,
literacy, STEM conversations, so important to go beyond the classroom walls.
it really is. It's such a key part of our lives now that we really need
Mm.
to, make it more part of our lives in meaningful ways so that we can actually understand how it impacts us and, what it actually is to us on a day-to-day basis. And it's, yeah, all that inquiry is what really drives all of that interest and that understanding.
What I've noticed over the years is, that it's getting children to be present in that moment. When you've got something like a project that you absolutely love and you're passionate about, how do we capture that? I often say to people, what, especially with science teaching, is that experiment won't be finished in a lesson. It won't be completed in that lesson, really. And what
Mm.
tends to happen in kind of in school science is, you've got to get through the topics. I'm going to complete this, and we don't fall in love with the process of the science and the learning. We're kind of just trying to get to the end point. And
Yeah.
sometimes, as we know with science and STEM, that end point never happens, or when it does happen, it's a failure from what you thought your hypothesis or your predictions were. So that kind of love of falling in love with the process is super, super important. And that's what I try to
Mm.
say, to teachers and to children. Like, this is what the essence is: the questioning, the changing along the way, the going off on a different tangent. That's the real exciting part. The end result is great, but really, that the journey is the most important part. So
It is.
yeah, and I think that's, in teaching in general, that kind of, when you're part of the moment of learning, the experience is so much richer. And I always sort of say to people, imagine you've been given a task and you've been told you've got 5 minutes, and then you cut someone off and say after 3 minutes, "Oh, sorry, that's it, done." You actually get angry. You actually get frustrated. And I'm saying to imagine what children feel like if you're saying to them, "Okay, we're done now, move on." That feeling of kind of not getting it done you feel it yourself. So
Yeah.
that is something I really aim to try and do, is give that time and dedicate that sort of passion to that project along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's such a great way to approach all of these things because, yeah, it really is about the process and the journey of
Mm.
getting to the knowledge as opposed to just hitting your milestones and making sure you hit these particular targets to say, yep, I've completed this task and this task and this task, but without being engaged with the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think um, some of those skills now we talk about, these kind of 21st century skills or what we're looking for in the future. And when you're engaged in a process and it, there's more opportunity to be collaborative, to work with your peers, to learn from one another. And I think the the best learning comes from one another. When you put children together, peer support and peer learning, they seem to listen better to each other as well. I think, and maybe they just got sick of my sound of my voice, but I think I see kids together, and especially with multi-age grouping as well. Getting year sixes to come down and teach concepts to year ones, that is really important as well, because that mimics the workplace as well, from learning one another. And I think the more we can
Mm.
introduce that, the younger we can in education, the more successful our students will be when they leave and enter the workplace.
It is. And it's wonderful as well getting the older students to try and illustrate
Mm.
these concepts to the other kids because you can also see and they can see, these are the things that helped me to understand. And it being able to develop that kind of peer education and that kind of you're teaching them to teach. And that's just as
Yeah,
important as the learning aspect as well.
100%. And I learn. I think what I value sometimes is that being um, that eternal learner, that person who actually
Mm,
does enjoy learning. And I worry sometimes in certain education, when we do that, we actually take away that passion and that love for learning, and we get people to the end point. Oh, I finished my ATAR. Oh, I finished university. I'm done. And it's kind of the most pleasure I get is from learning from one another. So to be able to kind of instill that
mm,
in students is really important. Even the other day, I'm trying to explain something, and I had one of my colleagues explain it beautifully. And I remember just thinking, oh, I'm going to try and learn how he did that, because I found that really helpful. And that person clearly found it more helpful than my explanation. But just seeing how others do things is really important. And I know that sometimes I am all over the place. I've got all these ideas. And seeing how somebody breaks something down to smaller steps is really important, because
mm,
sometimes we just go a bit, 100 miles an hour, and then we assume knowledge as well, which is really
yeah.
dangerous. So being able to break things down and talk with someone who's learning about that journey, and that communication, that relationship, as we spoke about before, that's the key part if we want to see success at the end, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really so important because all throughout life when we're doing anything, there's a lot of the time there's a lot of miscommunication because of assumed
Mm.
knowledge or you're passionate but you barrel ahead and you're skipping steps and you
Yeah,
lose people along the way because they see that you're passionate but they're just not quite catching onto the notes that you're trying to convey to them because you haven't learned to slow down and you haven't learn to, you know, express yourself with people with all sorts of backgrounds and with all sorts of levels of understanding and experience. And yeah, so having that opportunity to learn from each other is such a great way of being able to, you know, get better communication going for that.
and you're completely right. I think there is this drive for getting to the end point and rushing, and really, the sort of celebrating the success of people who can do everything and do it really quickly
Mm,
and do it really efficiently. And we stop and forget that impact, especially on our mental health and our families, is quite important. So, I find that, then ironic that we have to teach the mindfulness to students, because there they were in their primary years, especially in the very early childhood years, where they're doing this play-based learning and they're just engrossed in the moment and they're in it. And then we're having to teach later on how to be in that moment and how to be present and how to slow that speed down. It's kind of
mm.
we're pulling at two ends of that spectrum, and having that right balance is something that, I think a lot of work needs to be done in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and because education is such a young field comparatively
Mm.
to, some of the other things that we're actually teaching,
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see how that is evolving and that is
Mm.
developing over time, because we're getting a better understanding that people have different modes of learning that suit them better. And we're
Mm.
learning more about the fact that, play-based learning and experience-based learning is so important. And we need to make sure the younger children have that in early education. We need to have that.
Yeah.
And then we cut them off once they hit structured school and they have to start
Yeah.
doing it the conventional way. And it's like, but
Ah.
you've just taught us to do it one way, and now we're having to do it another way,
Yeah.
and
And I
they're not necessarily compatible.
and that's the danger we have with education in thinking that one size fits all. And sometimes, oh, we found the holy grail of getting this outcome. um, because
Yeah.
you actually then really take away, that's looking at it at kind of a really umbrella term of, I want to get a school through a system as opposed to the individuals. And it was
Mm,
interesting, actually, we were having this online discussion recently with some colleagues. A colleague from mine over here who is in Australia, has gone over to Dubai, and he'd shared some of his excellent work on being of teaching early childhood, and he's a secondary teacher, and how in his new role he's teaching across the spectrum. But the discussion really looked at how we can learn from one another in a teaching space. Because when you look at children from 0 up to 18, it's not just about what they have to learn, it's how they've actually developed. We know that, we know the kind of the science behind it, all those
mm,
different processes they're going through, hormonal changes, just general childhood development. And so for us as educators to go and work in those different spaces, it gives us a real appreciation of what's going on through those stages. It's
mm,
always easy to go, oh, but that happened in the early years. Oh, that we'll leave that to the secondary. But actually working together, and for us to get a perspective as a primary school teacher, what do the high school teachers need? And the high school teachers coming down saying, oh, that's what's going on there. I think that cohesiveness will work really well if we just kind of make sure we adopt that whole process and look at that whole journey from the zero
mm.
all the way up through, and treat that as a whole rather than compartmentalized areas.
Yeah. And it really is about getting a holistic view of
Mm.
education and educational kind of development, and the way that we do kind of evolve as we grow further learning. Because, yeah, as you said, compartmentalizing it, you end up losing context between
Mm.
each compartment. And
Yeah.
how you get to this stage of education, or how they are heading into this other level of education. And yeah, it really is so important to think about these things. But then you start opening all these doors to complexity, and having
Yes.
to create these systems that are one size fit all but tailored
Yeah.
at the same time. Like it's such an impossible task.
Yeah. And I think that is something that, as an individual, as a teacher, that is where that kind of, that real has to be, that it's yours, it's at the student level, what's best for that student going through. Because yes, that system is always going to be an overarching one. And I think we do well in the sense that learning from one another, and not really, and that saying that as a country as well, going to other countries and seeing how things work, and how, taking into consideration different cultures, different environments, that's really important. But also at a teacher level, when you're in that classroom, the most important thing is to know your students, and that is it. It's to knowing that each student has a different learning journey, identifying that, saying, giving those parents that feedback that they'll be all on different journeys, and what might be happening now could be happening in a few years' time. um, it's always interesting to think, and it's hard when you're actually in the classroom doing this, but saying to student teachers as well, that what you do in the classroom today might not have an impact until 2 or 3 years down the line.
Mm,
And I think what happens is, it's hard as a teacher when you're getting results, and say you're doing a NAP plan result and you're in a year 3 or a year 5 classroom, taking that as a personal thing, oh, they haven't done as well. But it's a collaborative process as a team, that we work together, that we have that impact later on. That child might not develop that skill right now in your classroom, but they remember your teaching, and that they apply it 3 years down the line.
mm.
That is the key thing to message for, because it's not an instantaneous thing. Education isn't straight away. You don't get that instant feedback often. It is a process and a journey.
Absolutely. And it's a process as much for the student as it is for the teacher. And, having to adjust those systems as well to account for that fact, because teachers will also have key performance indicators and all these lovely,
Yeah,
corporate and systemic things that they need
yeah,
to hit for to be able to get their marks for
mm,
their position and whatever it is
yeah,
that they're trying to achieve. And it is trying to understand that you need to be able to assess things in a different way. That's not, it's still, qualitative value that you
yeah,
can measure, but it's not just hitting marks for them as well, hitting milestones and hitting particular tick boxes. And
yeah.
yeah, that balance is also very challenging to have to
Yes.
manage.
And I think, I'm such a proud member of my profession. I think teachers are such incredible individuals, and I think that the majority of all our teachers do an incredible job because their passion and their drive is for their students. That is a
Mm,
real thing. And yes, a lot of the paperwork, all of those kind of milestones, the KPIs as you're referring to, they do have an impact on being able to do the job. And I think um, really trusting the teachers are doing a great thing. You can go into a school, and if you meet an admin team and they trust and they respect their staff, and they give them that kind of the ability to be who they are and to really drive their learning and drive their teaching, the atmosphere within that school environment is just beautiful and harmonious. And
mm,
that comes from trust and from believing in your staff. And I think that's a lovely thing, because teachers doing an amazing job, but it's an all-encompassing job. And I think, as you refer to that holistic approach, you are not just teaching content. You are, to some little
mm,
child, the most important person at that time. And I also sometimes said to parents when they're saying, I said, I'm lucky. I get your child for 8 hours of a day. I want those to be some of the best 8 hours. I'm so lucky that I have that opportunity to spend so much time. For a lot of the time, I'm spending more time with your child than you are, because, of work commitments or getting them to bed. So I really value that. And I never
mm,
ever take that for granted, that I've got that wonderful opportunity to build relationships with such gorgeous people, and know
mm.
that that is a really important part of their day. So yeah, it's a pretty awesome job.
And it's really beautiful because so many teachers do feel the same way. And
Mm,
it's such a rewarding way to be able to spend a career, because you're being able to see these
yeah,
people grow and learn and come into their own, and have the eyes light up because of what they're learning about the world.
yeah,
And that's beautiful. It's such an amazing
yes.
experience.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And coming back to your journey, so
Mm.
going into education, how did you find your way to a focus in STEM?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was a interesting one. So I think my goodness, my family, as I said, were are in the STEM fields. My sister, a few years younger than me, is she's a veterinary dermatologist. So all in that kind of field. And I am adamant that I was not going to do science or anything to do with science. I think I hated the fact that I was in top set maths. I hated the fact that I was asked to do science. So I was determined I was going to be on the stage and I was going to do acting. And I remember just really just that was, the kind of the headstrong view. And then I decided maybe not. So I'd go, definitely, it was definitely teaching and acting. So I was going to go to teaching, but I was not going to be, I was going to be an English teacher at this point. And then I got to university, and I ended up bizarrely going through my honors program at university, going into more linguistics. And I don't know why, because I think the issue, I think what I suddenly dawned on me when I was doing the linguistics part of it was, I'd be given a piece of language, and you had to, decode it and find all those key parts of speech. And I've actually loved the process of the decoding part, the finding
Mm,
the errors, looking at things and analyzing. Um, and I think that's probably where I finally agreed that maybe science, IT, all those kind of elements in the STEM spaces were actually where my strengths lay.
yeah.
So I went into that, and I actually, when I first graduated, I ended up. Well, not ended up. I, was very lucky to get my first position at quite an elite, prestigious school, a private school in England, and it was in Oxford. It was a beautiful school called the Dragon, fantastic place to work. But really, how lucky I was for my first job, because being in that environment, I was given that flexibility to really hone my teaching skills. In those sort of environments, I think it's quite lucky because you have the financial security in a school. You really are there. You have a really good governance. There's not issues with staffing per se, because you've got plenty of staff on board, so you're not trying to cover other people's lessons all the time. And you've got, you're not dealing with so much of the behavior issues or any kind of really extreme traumas. You're sort of really in a nice environment where you can learn to grow as a teacher in that teaching space. So my pedagogical approach and my pedagogy was really embedded well, because I had that time and that flexibility. And I was also very lucky because in a school like that, I think you get to be creative within your craft and be able to define who you are as a teacher. So that was a really wonderful place. And I was also lucky that my colleagues were kind of similar personalities. We're all quite ambitious. We were all kind of competitive, and you learn from one another in that environment. So I was incredibly lucky to fall into that position where um, I could become a teacher that I wanted to be, and the teacher I wanted to create for myself. That was what I was really
Mm.
lucky to be in. I think probably I was still trying to pull myself back from STEM. I still didn't want anything to do with STEM, and I was doing dance and I was doing everything else. And then as I moved jobs, moved back home for a little bit. A job came up to be science teacher, and I said, "Oh, I'll take it for a bit." And then that literally just took me on a trajectory, and I was like, "Oh, actually, this is quite good fun." Those moments of going, "Oh," and also what I think I loved about science and STEM was that you've got a captive audience.
Mm.
At primary school level, every child wants to do science and STEM. I've very rarely found a child who doesn't. That's just, oh yeah, do we get to do blow up stuff? Do we get to make things? It's the best job in the world. Like, I've already got them. I don't even have to work hard. I've got them at the door, desperate to get in the door, because it's hands on and they get that release.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get to do stuff and play and do all this. So, yeah, I was so lucky in that sense. My journey into that was very good.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And it's wonderful because, yeah, at that age, it's mysterious and it's fun and it's
Mm.
how does it work and why does it do that? And hey, this explodes. This is very cool. And
Oh,
it's that flashy kind of side of science and STEM that really engages at a young age because it's magic.
oh,
It's the stuff that they don't, it's the science that we haven't figured out yet to them. Because yeah,
exactly.
it's cool.
And I think if you think, when we all think back to our kind of early years, the magic and the mystery of something, the kind of phenomenon of the Harry Potter time and all those kind of previous things. What I like to link to in my own science teaching now is being able to have science explain some of these curiosities in the world. And that's a journey you have to take yourself. You often get, especially in the early years, teaching children who will be absolute experts on a specific scientific topic. Space is a big one. Children get absolutely blown away by space and they will know every planet. And I will have to put my hands up and say, you know what? I just don't know. I just don't know enough about this. Or dinosaurs. Oh my goodness me. Um, Dinosaurs are huge for little children, and the words they can come out with and what they know. And I think as a science teacher, the most important thing is to acknowledge that to a child, to say to a child, "I'm learning from you," is a really powerful statement. To say to a
Mm,
child, "You know what? I don't know about that, but I really want to know about that. Can you teach me?" And you're
mm,
putting a real powerful lens on that, because a child then has the confidence, but also knows that they have that power to teach others and to share their expertise with others. And I think that's the beautiful thing about science, that can happen all the time, and being able to share that and bring people in and get others on that journey. Incredible, incredibly powerful.
it is really incredible. And yeah, just being able to see them so passionate, like it's lovely to see people who are passionate about things. So when, when kids get completely full bottle on a topic and they just start rattling it off, it's like, this is really educational. I love this. This is wonderful. And they love that you think it's great.
Yes.
And it's just constant cycle of, yeah, it encourages them to go, I should learn more because then I can
Yes.
get more of this very cool response because I can keep sharing. And
Oh,
yeah, it's part of that journey.
very much so. And I always make reflection, but was very powerful for me, was that many years ago I was working up in Pilbara at a school, and we have a big STEM day where the whole school is just engaged in STEM on a specific topic. And we were looking at earth sciences, and it was the topic of the space. And so we went full on out there, and we had, an astrophysicist come up to visit us. We were doing all these incredible projects. But what was wonderful was a parent actually worked at Woodside and said, "Oh, we've got like a kind of a sister program going with NASA." And I was lucky. I went over to NASA, he said, and he came in, did a little talk, and then he said, "I know it sounds silly," but he said, "But actually, I've got two of the colleagues from NASA are going to be over here in Australia at that time, and could they come and meet?" And they're going to come up. And it was just perfect time, and the stars
That's
aligned
wonderful.
genuinely in that pun. And two of these staff from NASA came, and the first thing was one of the young gentlemen walked into the science lab, and there was a book on the wall on the book, and he said, "Oh, that's interesting, because that robot," it was a Dorling Kingsley book. "Oh, I was on the design process team for that one, for that robot that went to Mars." And you're kind of just like, "What?" It was like, it's a bit like rock star status. The kids were blown away. But what was more important was his wife. We had the big conversation at the end, and she said to all the children, she said, "When I was in kindergarten, well, she said, when I was 5, I told my teacher I was going to work at NASA." And we're all like laughing. She said, "So when I got my job at NASA, the first person I rang was my mum." And she said, "The second person I rang was my first grade teacher." And I think for us educators in the room, it was a bit of a pin drop, because
Yeah.
it was a bit like, wow, at the age of 5, you might know where you want to be. And that year 1 teacher had clearly believed in her that she would do that. And I
Mm.
think that's always what sticks in my mind, always, that your belief in a child, especially in that science space, that if they're going to be an astronaut, my goodness me, I'm going to make sure I can do everything I can to tell them that they're going to be that astronaut, because that might
Yes,
be all it takes. So yeah, that's a really
exactly.
powerful thing for me.
It really is very powerful because, yeah, you don't know what anyone is going to achieve at any
Mm.
age. So why hold them back?
Yeah, exactly.
I,
Exactly.
yeah.
Definitely. And so, yeah, I think that's what those moments in teaching, when, they, it can get tough and it can get hard. And I think especially for students as well, um,
Mm.
there are so many obstacles in the way. And I think for myself, having come along this journey in education 20 years on, where I started, in those beautiful, the towering spires of Oxford, and where Oxford University is, and it's a beautiful environment, and it's very academic and focused, and you've got that kind of, you can see that pathway to sometimes, to things I've done the latter few years of my career, where I'm going to regional and really remote areas where, you know, that isn't even on the horizon. That's not
Mm.
even a visual for those students. Um, to go to university in itself is a huge thing, and the barriers in their way stopping them, even just geographically. How do I get from
Mm.
this remote area into a city to do that? And I think luckily education is catching up, so that there is more opportunities for children in regional remote areas. But it is interesting, having done travel across the world and also being in different environments, seeing some children just don't have those opportunities. And so
Yeah,
you as a teacher have to be that person who is providing them with that kind of direction, and that kind of that dream, keeping the dream alive. So yeah, it's a really rewarding thing, but it is also heartbreaking at times to see that, and kind of know that for some children it is a really, really long and tough ride.
it is. And yeah, I remember we spoke about this before,
Mm.
and for me, it really stuck with me because it's really so true about privilege, because you were
Mm.
talking about how these students, they walk out of the Dragon, they can
Mm.
actually see
Mm.
Oxford
Yes.
in front of them,
Yes.
and they visually have this objective that they know that they
Yeah.
can. It is literally within reach. It's
Yes.
at their doorstep, and just having that by itself alone,
Mm.
it's so powerful,
Yeah.
and it might not be something that you are consciously aware of,
Mm.
but you can see it to go, yeah, it's right there. That's
Yes.
absolutely going to be the path. There's no other choice. This is just how it's going to go.
Yeah.
And you take that for granted. in,
Yes,
that kind of level of privilege.
100%. And you're
Yeah.
surrounded by individuals who probably have been there themselves or have been in that
Mm.
pathway, who have got that foot in those doors. And then, you do go to, especially up here in Western Australia, where remote areas, and that some of those children don't even have a high school. They're going in and doing remote education and that sort of thing. So I think, um, I'm lucky in the position that I'm in now, and the role that I do, that bringing children down from areas to meet at universities to see what's going on and to show them some of those pathways, but also, I think we've spoke about it before, that kind of connection to partnerships, into industries, into local things, to
Mm.
see that, because as you're saying, if you can't see it, it's a really
Yeah.
difficult concept, and it's an abstract concept for them to understand. So I think for me, I work. There's a fabulous, I think of her as my mentor. She's the most fabulous woman in STEM. She actually is the chair of the Women in STEM of Australia. Sarah Chapman up in Queensland. And I remember going
Hmm.
to her conference once and listening to her, and it was so powerful because she talked about, especially for young girls and especially for women in STEM, that journey of that mentor is really important. But
Mm.
also connecting to your industry, to your partner, and seeing what that journey is going to be like, and having that kind
Yeah.
of that pathway. That's success. That's when you can see the success. So I remember always now
Mm.
thinking to myself, if I can bring those experiences to children, if you want to be a doctor, this is the experience. If you want to be an engineer, this is the experience. If you want to be a NASA astronaut, this is the experience. Just that will help take over some of those barriers along the way.
And yeah, it's really just having something more concrete, because if you don't have that exposure, everything is just in the abstract. It's kind of
Yeah,
nebulous in you can sort of see it is possible, but is it
yeah,
possible for me?
yeah.
And, living in Australia is so remote. I remember growing up and, even talking with other kids, it'd be like, yeah, I would love to work at Disney, but there's no Disney here.
Yeah,
That's impossible.
yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to work at NASA. We don't have a proper space program. How are we going to ever achieve that? And it's
yeah,
so vague, and you just go, well, I can't see a path. I don't
yeah,
see how this is a viable route for me. So yeah,
yeah.
being able to connect with these partners and these other people who have done this, who have walked this
Mm,
path, who have taken this journey, and be able to say, hey, this is the route they took. This is
yes.
one of the ways that we can achieve this particular goal. And yeah, it really gives you something more concrete to hold on to in terms
Yeah.
of goal setting and, knowing what's possible for you.
Oh, completely. And I think as well, what we're lucky in the sense that we're becoming more connected to the world out there,
Mm,
knowing what's out there. Some wonderful work is going on in Australia, especially in that kind of I think the STEM sort of space. I've got some colleagues, Wendy Bode up in Queensland, and Scott Sleep out in New South Wales, who they're doing virtual STEM academies now. So children all over the
nice.
country can come together to learn particular things that they're passionate about. And we connected in Australia, but then how do we connect beyond that? Where are we going?
Mm,
How do we connect with our colleagues out in the UK, into America, into China, so that children have got that understanding of where we sit within a bigger sphere, and the
yes.
opportunities that could be available? Exactly that. And I think as well, brilliant thing with now going, the outsourcing of being able to work remotely
Hmm.
has brought that to us. We can do a role. We can work for a Facebook or a Google, but it's in San Francisco, but there is work to be done elsewhere. And that time zone
Yeah.
difference, that is now a bit more of a reality. Um,
Mm,
and I think for a lot of students, I don't know, I feel quite passionate as well, is that they see that a lot of the time through gaming, through platforming, and to see that, they're connecting with others in that sphere. And I know there's so much negativity towards that often in the gaming space, or what are children learning? But for a lot of those children, they're connecting with like-minded individuals on a bigger scale, and we're bringing people
mm.
together. And if it's in many ways, children get so much benefit from that connection, in that kind of online sphere. And I think that's what we have to look to as education, is look at the benefits of it, and how do we capitalize on that to create experiences for children that are relatable to them as well.
Exactly. And yeah, even like in the 90s when, I was online and I had friends in the
Mm.
UK and the US and
Mm.
interstate, it was, for me, the internet really reduced those barriers, because, like, yeah, I can have regular communications with these
Yeah.
people in other countries, and it's not really an issue with time or distance. And then you
Yes.
start entering the workforce, and at the time, still very conservative. And it's like,
Mm.
oh no, everything's local. If it's not, where you live,
Yeah.
that's it. Yes, there's no option for you.
Yeah.
And, I've been working remote since 2008. And for
Yeah.
me, because my skill set is portable as a dev, it makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And you learn that there really isn't a boundary. Time makes things a little bit tricky to manage
Mm.
for work days. But in terms of communication and access and, connections and networks and being able to, bridge other
Yeah.
communities and geographically, other countries, it's not really that big of a deal.
Yes.
And it's been wonderful seeing people kind of come on board with this in the last few years
Mm.
as well, because you're getting programs which are more accessible that they didn't used to be. There are, one of the things I love doing is signing up for the Bletchley Park seminars in the UK and listening to them, because like I would
Yes.
have no opportunity any other time to do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, being able to learn from these people elsewhere
Mm.
doing things that they love and that they specialize in, it really opens so many more doors. And
Mm.
being able to make the kids have that access as well, whether they're in regional areas or
Yeah.
urban, like it's so important because they get to see all this really cool stuff out there that they could also be doing.
Oh my goodness. And I think we have so much to learn from others in terms of the culture, understanding landscapes. That's what, I'm just thinking before I'm working our organization is working with a fantastic inquiry educator in Canada, a guy called Trevor McKenzie,
Mm,
who's just fabulous. But what was interesting, we were on this big Zoom call with my staff and they were looking at, and one of the students came in and the teacher said, she's just desperate to meet someone with a Canadian accent. She's never heard, spoken. And, we're sort of going, oh, okay. But I think for a child, often they see things on the television, but to connect to somebody, because where they live, they probably haven't had many, local tourists or people can, and she just loved it. She wanted to just hear him speak and talk and interact
yeah.
and have that conversation. That brought a real big smile to my face as well, because that we could connect across boundaries, we can connect across countries and have so many friends in that lovely landscape that it is. And even just those
Mm,
silly little conversations of what's the weather like? Let's, just it's just so beautiful. And I remember used to doing it with children with connecting when you do the weather landscape, or especially in science.
yeah.
And it's using a very simple, it was an app that you could download on your phone called Google Science Journal, which is now Arduino Science Journal, a great app.
Hmm.
But children could collect through the sensors on the phone different things about their environment. So it was things like what's the temperature, or kind of what's the light intensity, and just take some photographs and store it in like a journal and share it. But what was lovely was I did that as a project, and a lot of the children up in the Pilbara, but they were connecting to family members in Finland, in Sweden, in Canada, in America, in China, and being able to just share that with other people in the classroom at that right moment in time. We were both online, we were both doing this is the two different images, was such a rich lesson, and it was a simple lesson that we could connect to.
Mm,
So those are the things I think, giving children more of those opportunities to do that is going to be key to success for them, especially in the future mark. As we're talking about, what's the future going to look like for a lot of our students and when they're coming out, and it will be more of a connected world. As you're saying, the real difference is maybe time barrier, but even then, we seem to work around the clock now. So I think the future is going to be very much in that space.
yes, absolutely. So, you mentioned like inquiry-based learning. So,
Mm.
you know, can you elaborate more on,
Yeah.
inquiry-based learning and how that differs to, what we might have grown up with?
Yeah, I think so. Inquiry learning, especially in the context of how we've been looking at it through, the work I've been doing with my organisation and working with someone like Trevor out in the Canada, is inquiry learning is based on the curiosities, the wonders of the children. Like, where do they want to take their learning? And it's giving children student agency, student voice, so that, for example, a big thing that Trevor works on is the idea of having a prompt, or kind of something that will spark the interest of a child. So giving them something that, could be a video, it could be an image, it could be an experience. But where do they then take their learning? What do they want to know more about? What do you see? What do you think? What am I wondering about?
Mm.
Now, in many cases, this is quite difficult for teachers, because we're going, but I've got to teach this. And this child's now decided they want to go and do that. And you're going, And that becomes, it's very much the craft, of the teacher, that you kind
Mm,
of know the end point you're steering kids to, but you're giving them the opportunity to take hold of the reins and get to that end point. That's the kind of the real key part of the inquiry learning process. But it really is an immersive experience. That child takes the curiosity, the learning, and runs with it, and how they present it. Do you want to present it to me as a speech? Do you want to present it to me as as an article? Do you want to make a journal? Do you want to make a stop motion animation? Whatever you want to do. I think that is the part where we introduce that creativity.
mm.
And there's a lot of debate in our field, especially with the STEM versus the STEAM and all the different acronyms. But you cannot take creativity out of it, because that is a key
No.
component of learning. And it is very important. And I think what happened with probably the acronym that we look at, STEAM and STEM, is that sometimes that becomes a bit of a barrier to what actually the real thinking behind that
Mm,
is. And this creativity of learning, being able to take whatever topic you're learning, but take it in your direction and run with it, is something really important. So that's what we've wanted to do as an inquiry. When you look at the curriculum, what's really interesting is that inquiry is embedded. That's actually got to be assessed in the science curriculum and the HAS curriculum. And it really is a process of questioning,
mm,
looking at something, questioning it, finding more information out, going back, questioning a bit more, going back. And it's a process, that inquiry process
mm.
skills. So what we've done this year, especially in the organization I'm working at, the Polypharma Foundation, is getting topics that we're looking at, but asking the children what they'd like to learn about, going with them and saying, okay, well, we'll support you in that. We'll give you opportunities to learn about it. But really, what would you like? We're putting the ownership on you. What do you want to learn about? We'll come and help you. And that's been a
Yeah,
real luxury. And what we're seeing is some of the most beautiful work coming out. And children who just are shining because they've got a bit of that flexibility and they've got a little bit of ownership. And the pride
yeah.
that comes with owning your work is massive. Really good. It's just, yeah. And you're assessing yourself against your own standards as well. And as teachers supporting you on that, it's not so much of a comparison against one another's work, which is really important.
It is. And, being able to give them the opportunity to explore what it is that means something to them as well is really important because it helps you maintain that level of passion for the topic.
Yes.
And, it's giving them context for what they're actually learning on the way. Because, you can give them math, you can give them science, but if they don't understand
Mm,
how it fits in their worldview, how it fits in their expanding worldview, then it makes it really hard for them to kind of latch on and run with it. So yeah,
100%.
giving them that opportunity to choose is so great.
Yes, and I think the space that we're in, so the Polypharma Foundation works with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and it's sort of an academic program for students. Um, and what's been really interesting, for those children as well, to come in with their experience and the knowledge of their culture and a lot of the kind of their understanding of science and kind of the hands-on approach to science and learning in STEM.
Mm,
That's been really important to us, because um, what we're finding is those students are incredibly creative, but also their level and depth of knowledge has come from thousands and thousands of years of understanding in science.
mm,
And I know CSIRO used to have, indigenous scientists as the first scientists, and they are the first scientists on it because they have studied and studied for thousands of years. And if we look at the
yeah.
process of science itself, it's a long process of studying,
Mm,
changing and studying and moving forward and changing ideas. If we even look at ourselves, I remember, Pluto was definitely a planet when I was young, and it was in the book, and
yeah.
you find books now, and recategorization and things have changed. But it's that kind of
Mm,
open-mindedness you have to have in the person in the STEM fields to say, it's just because it's been done this way before, but is there a different way of doing it? And how am I going to learn on that journey? And how do I think outside of this box? How do I look at problems and go, oh, it could be done better, or it could be done differently? And how do I learn from each other and looking at how someone does it? How can I take elements of that and change that? And that is, I think, the key component of what inquiry learning is all about.
mm, it is. And it kind of brings it back to I spoke to another guest about indigenous AI, and it's applying
Mm,
the context of indigenous knowledge and indigenous learning to the future science and
yes.
having that context so that wherever we go on that journey, we have that past context with us and it helps to shape where we're headed. And that's all about the inquiry-based learning and with the programs that you're running, because they get to apply this cultural
Yeah,
and indigenous history and background and knowledge and the context of where they came from to the science of now, and how, that can work together. And yeah, it's
very
really
much.
beautiful.
And I think it really is. And I think what's lovely is when you're working in that space with those students, um, I've learned so much more with them about so many different things. And also it gives my knowledge a real richness because I can put it context. And I have a lovely story about a little boy who talked to me about being able to spot a kangaroo, if a kangaroo has a baby in its pouch. When you go out hunting, and he said because of the angle sometimes at which the kangaroo is hopping. And I remember
Mm,
thinking, wow, he will smash pivots and levers and everything later in life because of that understanding which he's learned from being out there with his family and I thought that was for me now when I ever think of levers, I do think of that. And I think of that weight and and I think of that completely. And that's what I've learned along the way. And I think having an open mind and learning from others, as we talk, so many decisions can be made without context, without history, without understanding prior knowledge. That's, as we talked about before, that kind of prior knowledge is really important if we want to move forward with where we're going, I think, as a future, especially in that science field. Um,
yeah, it is.
but simple things, and I know we talk a lot in education about these 21st century skills, or the global competencies, and looking at that, and problem solving. And it's really interesting, a problem solving approach, because problem solving
Mm,
is often quite difficult for a lot of people. You can have an idea, but problem solving is the thing that we keep saying, oh, we want staff to be good problem solvers, critical thinkers. It's actually quite difficult unless you give children the opportunities to come against problems. And I think
yeah,
for a long time we have sheltered in education, the idea of actually having those problems, because we sort of don't allow children to fail. It's like, well, I'll tell you the answer, and you're going, well, actually you need to find the answer by problem solving, finding things out, getting it wrong the first time. And that is a key thing to settle with. And none of us find that easy. No one likes to do something wrong or fail at something, but it's learning how to get through that failure to get to the end is really important.
it is. And yeah, failure comes up a lot when I'm talking with my guests, because it's such an important part of the process, and
Mm,
it's still part of the science. Like, you still learned how it was not meant to be done. You still learn that this isn't the correct approach. And,
yeah.
you know, the negative data is still just as important as the stuff that confirms your hypothesis.
Oh,
It's about getting over our ego, and being a bit more humble about the fact that we are going to get it wrong on the way, and we're going to
yes.
figure out other stuff while we're at it.
Yes. And how many of us, it's also that, as you're saying, the acknowledgement that you've got it wrong. That is a big,
Yeah.
big thing. We all know that as children. When you're working with little children, they don't want to say they're wrong. Um,
No.
no, I'm right, I'm right. And it's that kind of, and even now in the workplace, we know that. How often have you been with
Yeah.
colleagues who just, you can't, and you're kind of, and it's hard, but it's something that's really, really important.
Mm.
Um, and it only comes from exposure to it. And I worry sometimes with sometimes when you're giving, I suppose that when you're delivering content to children, it's just giving them the answers, or it's giving them the context. This is the knowledge. This is what it is. Full stop. You just need to know it. That's a little bit dangerous, because we actually need to find that kind of the process of getting something wrong in order to find that end point. So yeah, I think giving children that sense of being able to fail, or and even not even failure, it's a sense that I'm building something, it's not worked out well, or it is working, but how do I make it better? And it's
Yeah.
that questioning. And I was lucky enough, I got to go to a school the other day and look at their designs for cars. They'd been working with Young Engineers Australia, and it was fantastic, because when you actually got talking to the students, oh my goodness, when you sort of say to them, oh, what do you think about this little part here? Oh, wow, because they were invested in that project, they could tell you how they're going to make it better. Oh, well, I could do that.
Yeah.
And then also how grateful they were for you to say, oh, do you think about a big tire would work there? Or do you think if you change that to be a little bit further down the axle, oh, yeah, that would be a brilliant idea. But it's giving yourself as a teacher and educator that time to work on a project and give it its just desserts, really. I think that's really important for me. And
Mm.
it's hard because we're plowing through a curriculum, but those moments are really important. Just to slow down, take time, conversation, learn from each other, and then really have that high expectation. It's all about having yourself high expectation as a teacher, and also having high expectation as your student yourself, your own self, putting that in. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So much in that. It's really, just giving them all those opportunities and, you know, opening doors to extra points of inquiry. And
Mm.
it is hard because you're having to constantly craft narrative almost. Like it's,
Yes.
this is the story. So how
Yes.
can we add a plot twist? How can we, change direction on this particular thing? And you're constantly having to do that on the fly.
Yes, and it's very much, it's an emotive process. It's actually, it's really important to connect to the emotion, um,
Mm,
how it's making you feel. And I know there's lots of things about reflection, and it's really embedded a lot into real things, theories of thought with education, is getting children to reflect on a process. But even then, that's difficult in itself. That has to be guided process.
mm,
What is that connection? How does that make you feel when you've got it right? How does it make you feel when you got that success? Because that connection to an emotion then is stays in the memory for longer. So when you do come across it later on in another project or another way down the line, that's often what drives you to continue. And I think as a
mm,
teacher, it is up to us to create those moments and to guide students through that. There is frustration, there is anger, there is a real sense of, oh, and as a teacher being able to support that and push
mm,
sometimes to push the buttons to get something where you want it to be, and know that in the context of your students is really important. And again, coming back to, for always, relationships first, building that
mm.
relationship with your student, because then the results will happen. Everything will happen if that relationship with that student is there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably one of the harder parts too, just building that
Yeah.
relationship.
Oh
And
yes.
yeah, just helping to guide them along that journey. Because even, like, as we were saying, that the kids don't want to be wrong. And
No.
even with my daughter, she likes to retcon things a lot because something will happen and
Mm.
she goes, "Oh, yeah, I totally knew that was going to happen. Oh, I already had that information." It's like, no, you didn't. It's okay to not have had
Yeah.
that information. You don't need to pretend that you had it. It's
Yeah.
all right. And
Oh,
it's difficult. It's such a challenge.
it is. And and it's easy. As you say, I have this with I can do it with other people's children, my own children, high school student now who is 100% convinced that 50% is the only thing you need to get, because, well, why would you want to get 150? And that kind of, you're going, ah, um, it's a journey as itself as a parent. And there's probably many parents out there going, oh, exactly. That motivation, and you've got to hope. And it's, what's really interesting is that my own son, I noticed that those subjects where he has a good relationship with his teacher, he gets those high results and he gets those marks, because I know that means something. And I think that's as I just alluded to before, that kind of that high expectations. And it's a really good thing to instill, I think, in someone, to say, aim for those, aim for that high part, aim up there, and know that it's going to be
Mm,
hard to get there, but aim there. Whereas if we're just saying that's
yeah.
actually okay, oh, okay, and if we say, oh, and as we talked before, oh, the job's finished, done, well, actually, the
Mm,
job could be on, it could be better, and we could aim that high. And I think that high expectation of yourself and of your students is really important.
it is. And also giving them that idea that if you aim high and you don't quite achieve it, that's also okay. And
Yes.
on the way, you might find a different path and
Yes.
a change in direction. And that's where the fun stuff is. Like you don't
Oh.
always have to, have that straight line route. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's often difficult for them to see that because they're going, yeah, A to B. But you can go
Yes.
A via C, D, and E.
Oh, yes, and it's
Yeah.
so much more fun. Exactly. Oh, couldn't say it better. That's just one of those things that way I thought I'd start. Oh my goodness, I want to be a head teacher and I want to be a principal. And my goodness me, the journey that I've been on different ways, it's just been the best ever. And you have so much fun. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, it's a changing, and also not being afraid as a person to change a career choice, or to make that change, and I think. Um, I say that often to student teachers as well, of being mindful of when you're teaching children that as well, that many don't have
Mm,
that specific endpoint in mind. And that's okay as well, because if you look at ourselves now, how many jobs we will have done along the way. And that's the beauty of being creative, that we can go, oh, well, actually, I'm going to change and do something else and retrain or do something different. And I think it's good to learn from that and take heart that you're not quitting at something. You're just pursuing another passion and interest that you have in your life. And I think that's
Yeah,
really important.
exactly. And the decisions that you make are only based on what information you have at the time.
Mm,
And once you get more
yeah,
information, that's
yeah.
where the decisions come in because you didn't know this was a path before, and now it is, and you have the
Yes,
information for it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, and it's very much, if you look at, for young people, a lot of the big things which have been consistently over time is wanting to be professional sportsmen, and they're really
Mm,
big things. And that's a really tricky one, and especially I think in this world, the rise of the YouTuber or the TikTok or the influencer, all of those things that which probably I'd say I'm struggling as a generation to kind of understand how to support that pathway because I'm not really in that space or I don't quite know
yeah.
how that happens. And I think, um, you know, that old adage of not being the sage on the stage anymore but being the guide by the side, that
Yeah.
changing that role of the teacher. I'm not the fountain of all information. I do not have everything at my disposal, but I do know how to support you as a young person and make sure that whatever journey you're on, I can help along the way. And as you're saying, if you don't make it, I'll be there to help support you in something else. That is the key part as an
Mm,
educator along the way.
yeah. Inquiry-based learning on both sides.
Yes, exactly. Very much so. Yes, very much,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay. So, having taught at,
Mm,
very privileged school and having
yeah.
taught in
Mhm.
less privileged schools and,
Mm,
urban, regional, all of that, you've
yeah.
had such a diverse range of experiences in this space.
Mm,
And, also UK and Australia.
mm.
But, what are some of the key observations that you've made about, this experience and the differences in the environments that really have stuck with you?
Oh, wow, yes. I think it was interesting because I do quite often quote this when I remember leaving university and I was graduating on the day and I graduated and I remember saying to myself, every child in my care will make progress. Whatever happens, I'll make sure they make progress. And if they don't, I'll make sure I fight and fight and fight to find out why that's the case. And I think because that's been in my head that wherever situation I've gone to and wherever I am in a different environments, that is always stuck. That those children will make progress and whatever within the kind of the limitations you might have or whatever it is, that will happen. And so I've always had that in mind. Um, you know, you, s- I think it's all about seeing the person, seeing that child as an individual, wherever they are, and knowing them, and whatever, understanding the complexities of a child, understanding their passions, understanding their goals in life, and being able to work alongside them. As I said, such a privilege to be part of someone's life, and to know that you've been part of so many people's lives, and that a child who may be where they are, as a neurosurgeon or whatever they're at from where I was, say, at the Dragon, and have gone into maybe what is perceived as a very illustrious careers to the person along the way who's actually become an amazing mum, family member, and is doing lovely things to support in the community, whatever it can be. To know that I've been part of that journey and been supportive along the way is the most important thing to me, and that child has felt that in my care, um, they were believed in and that they were important to me. I often say to, I obviously to change, you say to children, oh, I'm really proud of you. But I often used to say to children, you make me really proud to be your teacher. Like what you are doing is
Mm,
making me so proud. Um, and so every experience is unique, every experience is different. But I think as a teacher, having in mind that, yeah, that person is such an important part of your life as well. You can say that, as I said, every child's going to make progress in my care, but my goodness me, I never in a million years really could estimate how much progress I'd make. Like how much your
yeah.
impact as a child or as a student in my care has impacted who I am as a person in my journey is massive. And I remember every
Mm,
child and I see them all, and those images of that classroom and those moments. Gosh, my goodness, my life is so full of amazing memories because of the people I got to share them with, and those children and those conversations, um, and being able to be let into their lives and their parents' lives and their communities. Now I'm so lucky I get to go to some of the most amazing communities and learn so much and be part of something so special. that I never ever take for
Yeah.
granted. It's just the reason why you do it and you keep doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's so wonderful because yeah, you know that just as you're helping them grow, you're growing yourself,
Yeah.
and that's cool.
And you just always hope that you're a better person because of those lived experiences. And also the times that maybe you can, as a teacher as well, you can beat yourself up, say, I should have known that, or I should have, maybe I'd missed something, or could I have done more? You know, that I think that's the hardest thing as an educator is that you never ever finish a job because it is
Mm,
ongoing. There is always something else you could do. There is always another thing that you could find out about for this child, for that child, and that child. It is always hard, and it you know, it does keep you up at night often. Um, but I think it's also being really kind to yourself and saying, "Oh my goodness, within my capacity, I've done the best that I can, and my intentions are always so good to be with that person." So I think that's always important for me, and just if you see a need, try and respond to that, and not to educators don't do that, but I think that's just something that yeah, it's ongoing, and it'll never end. It's just the way the job is. Well, I guess.
yeah, yeah. It's just always continuous progress and continuous improvement, and just just constantly finding ways that you can help others find their way as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and finding those. Um, I think it's one of those things is finding there's something about that person that makes them different. Looking at
Mm,
all your children and knowing of child, and I do this because I got caught once, and not caught, but I'm in terms of, but I had a gorgeous child who I always remember, and it's probably a daily thing. And an occupational therapist came in and had done observation on them and was talking about them, and it was a bit of a negative one because the child was struggling, and it was what, and it was this, that, and they could do this and they could do that. And I remember just feeling a bit heartbroken. And then she said to me, "Oh, what do they like? What's their passion?"
yeah.
And I remember feeling a bit distraught because I didn't know. And so that made a real change. I remember just always thinking, okay, you can get caught up in thinking what a child can't do. And it's always looking for what they can do. You know what? I'm going to find out. And my goodness me, this child had the most amazing stuff because I just gave him, I was like, I'm going to give him more opportunities to do something different. And then I'll find that out. And so that's
Mm,
sometimes those little moments you have to stop and reflect as a teacher and look at all your little, getting all the little ducks in a row and going, but what have I missed? What do I not know about you? And then it all puts that context, and it all puts it into
mm,
perspective.
yeah. It really is. It's such a wonderful, you know, it's learning not to take these little things for granted, and
Yes.
just being a bit more connected, being more present, and just being a bit more aware of all of these engagements and all of these relationships around you. Yeah.
And I think probably yourself, as a parent, that's all you want. You want the teacher to know your child, to know them
Mm,
well, and to understand them, and to know their little idiosyncrasies, and just to be really gunning for them, whatever they want to do, be their number one supporter behind them. That's really important. And I always say that as well with women in STEM as well. Like I take that into my life with women, working alongside such powerful, wonderful women. And the only way we can be powerful is not if male counterparts raise us up, but it's because of each other. And that is a
mm,
really important thing. The only reason the reason we're strong is because our other colleagues support us and drive us and are passionate about what we do. It's so easy to bring someone down or to do that, but the biggest strength is backing one another and believing in one another. And so that's what I
yeah,
hope as well for young girls as well, that they know that there are us older females and in the sense of non-binary, just going there gunning for young people, making sure that we help and support them along the way.
exactly. And yeah, there's no reason for the cutting down the tall poppy thing. Like, there's absolutely zero
Mm.
need for it. So
Oh
yeah,
yes, that is a big thing. That was something I suppose. Oh, said no, the syndrome, but I think that was quite a big thing when I got to Australia. That kind of, I hadn't even heard of that, and then when I heard about it, I was like, oh my goodness, how many times have you experienced that along the way or seen it
yeah,
happen? And as you're right, there is absolutely no purpose to that. It doesn't help anybody.
it
Um,
doesn't.
If
Yeah,
anything, we should be putting the fertilizer down and growing it as tall as we can to
exactly.
make sure that those poppies are really strong and proud.
That's right. Okay, so let's see. It's probably a good place to kind of wind up there.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to some of those other questions.
Okay.
So, what hobby or interest do you have that is most unrelated to your field of work?
Oh my goodness. That's total. Yeah. You see, my family be like, "Oh, you live for your work. You love work." So yeah, I do. But, uh, um, and I suppose something like reading is a big one, but that's not really unrelated. What do I like doing differently? Oh my goodness me. Um, things, I know it sounds, and it's probably just a recent thing actually, which I've actually got quite good at. I'm not very good at keeping plants alive outside, but I've suddenly grown in the last few years a real passion for my indoor plants. And I know that sounds silly, but it's
It's
now one of
not.
those lovely things. To be honest, I have no idea the science behind it. I'm not really doing it. I think I'm just bungling my way along doing it. But I think I get a lot of pleasure from seeing things like that grow. Maybe that's the scientist in me, having things growing around. But yeah. So coming down from the Pilbara and coming into the city and finding a Bunnings was a really big thing because, oh my goodness me, it's a bit of a, oh, I'll just buy another plant, another plant. So that's been a lovely thing, I think, for me, is getting my plants growing and, keeping them alive. And I think that's yeah, keeping things alive probably is a good one. Seem to be doing quite a good job. My children are still there and my plants are, so it's all very good. But yeah, that's a real pleasure for me. Something like that
Yeah.
just keeps me busy and calm.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm not very good at keeping plants alive. And
Mm,
indoor plants are definitely a science because they can't have too
yeah,
little shade, they can't have too much
yeah,
sun. And it's
yeah.
very
I
particular.
And I did find, yeah, Kate, I used to start using some of those apps to try and tell me what was wrong, but now I'm kind of a little bit better at kind of having a little bit of gut instinct of maybe what's right and what's wrong. But yes, no, I do enjoy that, and I think, and people come with it. Oh, that's a lovely plant, and I kind of feel very proud of myself. However, I have no idea what their names are. I don't know what it's purely aesthetics. So that's quite a pretty one. I'll get that because it's got nice colours on it, or
Yeah,
that
that's
looks like
fair.
it's going to grow well. That's purely what it is.
That one will stay alive.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I've got a spot right for that one.
Still good. Yeah, that's
Mm,
awesome. Okay,
yeah.
and which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
Ah, Good Night, Mr. Tom. That
Ooh.
book was ah I actually still remember where I was. I was on the top bunk of my bed and I got to the last page and I just remember that overwhelming feeling of just despair and loss that you'd got to the end
Mm,
and it wasn't going to continue. And
yeah.
that is my biggest love of reading. I absolutely love reading, and I'm passionate about reading to children because it's actually, we can look at all the science of reading and lots of stuff, but we can actually look at the emotion with reading and the story and the believability. We talked about that before. Um, and with that book, and it was all about a little boy being evacuated during the war to live with someone. And I remember just at the end, just feeling like I'd been part of something. I was part of that person's life at that period of time. And you were really
Yeah.
in that moment, and they'd become something to you. And then when that goes, oh my goodness. And I think that's probably still what drives me to reading now. Like just knowing that actually once you start, even when you're in something so deep in a book, taking that time out feels like you're stepping out of your dream and you're
Mm,
going to try and get back to sleep to be in it. And I love that sense with reading, just being completely immersed in someone else's world and being part of it. So powerful.
yeah. And yeah, it's such a, finding that book where you really connect is
Mm,
it's really a very, very profound experience.
yes.
And my experience with that book is a bit different because that was required reading for English Lit or English, one of them. But
Yeah.
yeah, it really was such a powerful book. And,
Mm,
you know, you have books like Narnia and all those other ones where they talk
mm,
about the kids who have been evacuated. But that
yes.
story was just really, it was very impactful. And
Yeah.
yeah, you did feel that despair when, you got to the end. It's like, this was such an incredible experience that I've just shared with this character.
And
Yeah.
and what we've
Ooh.
talked about, throughout the whole podcast interview today, I think is that as a child, it's very easy to have your own sense of your childhood as the benchmark for what others is. And I remember
Mm,
that book being something for me that acknowledged someone else's childhood was a very different experience. And
yes.
it is it is very hard for many. And you looking at now what I see with a lot of children, especially those who may have been or displaced from their families, or suffering lots of things, or been taken away from family, and that kind of understanding. I remember really changing my way of thinking that my experience was not the only way. And as a child, it's very difficult
Mm,
because you often think inside your little bubble. But
yeah.
yeah, that was really powerful for me to go, oh gosh, other people have got a very different experience. Very different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love stories like that because when they're well written,
Yeah.
it really opens your mind a little bit more, and
Yes.
yeah, that's what makes it so enriching when you actually
Yeah,
dig straight into it.
definitely. And that power of being somewhere else. I think we all have those
Yep.
moments of escapism, and a book is the perfect way to do that. And it's just, I think my big thing with my own kids sometimes is just that, capturing that. I think it's a bit of a shame now, I think, but with the the way we consume information now is very short and brief.
Mm,
You look at the evolution of TikTok, or those little short clips where we cram information into short periods. Um, Getting into a text or getting into a longer piece of work, and even when we study text, it's short and sharp, and we pull out everything we can from 100 words,
yeah.
when actually the whole immersive experience and something longer and for longevity is something that can never be underestimated, I think.
I completely agree. Like, I'm all for long form.
Yes.
It's yeah,
On that, yeah.
yes. Hence these long conversations. But
Yes.
you can't get the kind of the depth and the nuance in the shorter ones, and I feel that
Mm.
that was originally what I wanted. I wanted something 20-minute kind of length conversation, and the first one that I recorded went over an hour. And there's no way I can make this shorter and still
Yeah.
have that quality about it,
Yes.
because
Yes.
we can't condense someone's life into 20 minutes. It just doesn't
No.
happen.
No,
Yeah.
very much so. And I think, which is a beautiful thing about, I think one of other podcasts I've listened to is the Desert Island Discs that the BBC do, and it is that journey of someone's life through different mediums. Um, and you're right, it's such, every stage is so important to somebody, and it's lovely to share that with somebody. And spend time with
Yeah.
people, just having that conversation, a bit self-indulgent about you. It's lovely.
Yeah.
It's a really nice thing.
Yeah, and it's really such a privilege speaking to, all
Mm.
of you, because you're sharing these amazing stories about, who you are and what you're passionate about, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah. Well, thank
Yep.
you very much for having us. It's a
Yes.
pleasure to do
Not a
this.
problem. And I love doing this too. And lastly, to wrap up,
Yeah.
what advice would you give someone who would love to do what you do, and what advice should they ignore?
It's about passion. Everything is about feeling, it's in your heart, how you feel. Like, do this, um, because that passion that you have when people succeed is what drives you. You can have your own success along the way, and I've been so lucky to achieve such success and be recognized for that. But there is no greater feeling than when someone else succeeds. Someone who you've invested time, you've invested, a lot of your heart and soul into a relationship and building that. When they succeed, it will supersede any of your own. So I would always say, teaching, you are so lucky. Be a teacher, change the lives of so many people, and do it with the passion, the determination. It is, it really is what it's all about. And in terms of ignoring advice along the way, um it takes a long time, but ignore that negativity of what sometimes can happen in the profession. That it's hard, and it's, trust your instinct, that believe what you believe in. Think along the journey, I'm a good teacher, I can change things, I will change things. Other things are there to set to try us, but at no point ever doubt the power that you have as an educator, on so many people. We are losing so many people in our profession for lots and lots of reasons. And I suppose want to say to them, so many people believe in you, so many people value who you are, what you're doing, and you are so important to so many people, especially the future. So many people will look back and say that because of you, my life was so different. So yeah, if you want to be a teacher, please do it. Please do it. And please do more science teachers. Be that passionate science teacher. Do those crazy things. Take it. Push the boundaries. If somebody says no to you, my goodness me, I was actually met with my previous principal a few days ago, and he said, oh my goodness, he said, I could not say no to you enough times, and it was just no, no, no. And then you would keep going and keep going and keep going and change things. And he said, it was eventually a combination of, yes, I started to believe what you were saying. And then secondly, I realized you were wearing me down but it was that thing, if someone says no to you and you passionately believe in something, don't give up. Don't give up. Keep going. If you think it's something really good for your kids, your students, and you want it to make it happen, knock down those barriers, because by you knocking down those barriers, someone else sees you changing it and they will do the same. Take out the
Yep.
glass ceilings. There.
Absolutely.
The future looks good.
Yeah. It does look good, especially with teachers like you.
Oh, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that everything that you're doing with passion and conviction, and I think that's all anyone can really ask for.
Yeah, and we have to look to the future. And that is the beauty, that I have in my job, that I actually can see the future. I'm looking into the future, and I'm looking at it, and I'm seeing young people, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you are beautiful, fabulous people who will change the world. And my goodness, I will be so lucky if I'm part of that world change that you're going to go and do. So yeah, it's looking good.
It's amazing.
Looking good from where I'm standing.
Amazing.
Block out all the other noise.
That's an amazing view. Okay, well, thank you so much, Anna, for speaking with me today. It has been so wonderful speaking with you again about
Thank you.
Your journey and your experiences in teaching, and all the ways that we can help bring everyone up and forward into the future. So
Yes.
if people would love to know more about what you do, where can they go?
Yeah, so I have got my LinkedIn profile, Anna Ritzema. I also have a Twitter handle, so at Anna Ritzy. So I try and share some of the good work that I see and what I'm doing. And obviously, currently I'm working as a primary programs manager and STEM and innovation manager at the Polypharma Foundation. So if you're not familiar with the Polypharma Foundation, please do go and look and see the amazing work of our students and our, the people in our field. Just they are going to be those leaders of tomorrow, and I'm so, so proud to be part of something that is really doing amazing things. So that'd be great to see you all on that journey. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So yeah, thank you so much again. And yeah, I hope everyone checks out the Polypharma Foundation, because the work that's coming out of that is just incredible to see. And yeah, it's really wonderful to see everyone being so passionate about getting all of this creativity out through STEM and all these other projects. Yeah. So thank you again. And yeah, have an incredible rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Lovely to see you. Take care.
Lovely to see you. You too. I've loved speaking with Anna about her journey and passion for education, and being able to guide and nurture our future generations on their own journeys of inquiry and discovery. To learn more about Anna and what we discuss on this show, or to connect with us, please visit the STEAM-Powered website at steampoweredshow.com. You can also find out more about the Polypharma Foundation at pff.com.au, and Anna on LinkedIn and Twitter at Anna Ritzy, the links for which will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to this show, leave us a rating, and share this with your geeky or geek-curious friends. You can also support Steam Powered on Patreon at Steam Powered Show, the link for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.